From the Zimmerman Symphony Center in Canton, Ohio, this is Orchestrating Change. I'm Matthew Jenkins Yarashevitz, Associate Conductor of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
And I'm Rachel Hegemeyer, President and CEO.
We are so glad you could join us.
This podcast navigates issues that exist in the field of classical music and the world at large. We invite you to listen with open ears as our guests share their experiences and as we discuss these often avoided topics.
We are joined today by Mario Lopez, Executive Director of the Billings Symphony in Montana. Prior to his appointment, he served in education and community engagement roles with both the Knoxville Symphony and the Sarasota Orchestra. Originally a French horn player, he studied at the University of Cincinnati's College-Conservatory of Music, then worked in the for-profit corporate world before returning to classical music on the administrative side. Mario Lopez, welcome to Orchestrating Change.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I think people through this conversation will figure out how much the two of us have in common because we both are people who have performance degrees, who ended up going into administration, who started in education and community engagement, and now are executive directors. So I'm very pumped for this conversation. But can you just tell a little bit of your backstory and who you are, where you come from, and about how you got involved in music?
Sure. So I was born in Venezuela. So my family's Venezuelan. And we moved to Florida when I was 5 years old and grew up in West Palm Beach, Florida. So I consider West Palm Beach my stomping grounds. That's where I consider home. And being there, when I started the seventh grade, actually, I decided to choose music as an elective. And when I saw the French horn, I was mesmerized by the shape, by the sound. And I didn't want to play flute or clarinet because those were too many keys and it was way too hard and complicated. So the French horn only had 3 keys. And here we go. That was my overachiever side, of course. And I chose the French horn and fell in love with it and knew right then and there that this is something that I wanted to do for a living, performance, playing the French horn. And that's exactly how my music career started.
Wow. Yeah. So you say there's too many buttons on those, and then you pick the French horn, maybe like one of the hardest instruments to play.
Correct.
And it's so funny because I'm a woodwind player myself, as is Rachel, and I was attracted more to woodwinds because I'm like, oh, just like the piano. I played the piano from when I was a child, and it's like, okay, the keys of the piano and the keys of the woodwind, and you just blow, and you don't have to worry about changing what your lips are doing. Yeah. And that to me was like way scarier than all the keys.
Yeah.
The young minds are really something fascinating. Yeah. So,
but also a French horn is a circle and it has a cool bell. It looks real fun.
Yeah. So you spent some time in my hometown of Cincinnati as a student of CCM.
Yes.
How was that?
It was amazing. Like I said, grew up in West Palm Beach. Music was near and dear to my heart. Went to the Alexander W. Dreyfus School of the Arts in West Palm Beach. And that really catapulted me into this is what I want to do. I got my bachelor's at Lynn University at the conservatory there in Boca Raton, Florida. And then I went to CCM for my master's studies. And it was probably the most 2 intense years of my life. It was just so intense, so focused. The studio was so focused. My horn professor at the time, Randy Gardner, amazing, prolific, and just a real treat, honestly. I'm super honored to say that I attended CCM, and I loved it. I loved Cincinnati. And while at Cincinnati, just a recital away from getting my master's degree, I actually went through a lip injury. And that kind of ended my performance career. I didn't know it at the time, but I took a couple months off. I started getting my playing back up. I attended CCM Spoleto that following summer. So I was doing some playing, I was doing a lot of low horn playing, and it was just not fun anymore. I was always in pain. I lost stamina, I lost endurance, I lost range, and it was really, really difficult. And I realized that at that point, this is something that I cannot pursue any longer. And that was a huge shifting point in my life. And so CCM has amazing memories, and Cincinnati holds probably some of my darkest memories growing up as well.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
so, I mean, so for those people who aren't brass players, people who don't understand the brass world, can you explain why a lip injury would be so detrimental to a brass player?
Absolutely. This topic is very taboo. And speaking of orchestrating change, we should normalize how we talk about some of these injuries. It's very, they're very common, but it's very hard as a musician to say I have an injury, because you move on to the next person. You need somebody to play these notes. You need somebody to play the gig. And you're kind of like, great, there's other people out there. And so people are very afraid to talk about these, to potentially lose their shine or their spot. But I tore my muscle just right above my lip. And what happens is you can't continue to form or maintain an embouchure correctly. And so I actually tore my muscle, but it felt more like a needle prick. There's lots of stories of people tearing muscles, and it's an audible sound. I didn't, mine wasn't as drastic. Mine actually healed on its own, but there's a lot of people that actually get surgery, and there's tons of people that have gone through surgery that are playing professionally and are playing really, really well.
Wow.
So you can come back from an injury. Read lots of books, went to go see Anthony McGrail up at the time in Toronto, Canada, who was known to be a lip doctor for brass players. And I mean, did the whole nine. And so there's tons of books out there. There's tons of resources on how to rehabilitate your embouchure. And I did. There was actually quite a few things in my playing that were actually better post-injury. My tone was better. My low range was better. There were things that were better because I was so much more focused on being intentional and just having a great setup.
Yeah.
And so at that point, some things were actually like, oh, I actually sound better than before my injury. And then other things, rear its ugly head, like no range or just stamina or pain. And so as taboo as it is, I think people need to talk about it more. And there is some light at the end of the tunnel for sure for a lot of our musicians, and some just have to move on.
That's so interesting. I think about, so I know several people who, string players who have had shoulder injuries because of the way that they were taught to, like the way you hold violin is not a natural position. And so there's a lot of research right now going on into how musicians treat their bodies while they're playing. And it's kind of like sports medicine, like sports injuries. Like, it's playing a sport is dangerous. And if you do not play correctly and work out your body correctly, you will get hurt. Or football, people are running into each other, someone's going to get hurt. But with music, it's the same way. If you overplay, if you hurt, like for bassoon, I started to almost feel like I was getting carpal tunnel or something in my left hand, because the bassoon weight all goes onto the left arm, basically. So I have two seat straps. I have one that goes over the seat traditionally, and then I have one that hooks into the back of a chair and then hooks into the back of the bassoon. And so I can let go, and the bassoon's just kind of floating in front of me, which is very helpful if I feel myself getting tired at all. But that happened my senior year of my bachelor. And I was like, I had to grab my bassoon and it was bad. Like there was several concerts I was like, I don't know if I can keep playing. My arm hurts so bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people don't understand that musicians are very much like athletes, although I might not look like an athlete. But, I tell people, go to the gym and pick up a dumbbell and just start curling and curl for 8 hours straight. And then come back tomorrow and do it again for 8 hours. And then come back the next day and do it for 8 hours. Eventually, your muscle's going to tear. Yeah. But there's not that much focus on that, because as you know, as music performance, there are just so many things that are vital and important in those 2 years, 4 years, whatever degree you're doing. And you can't possibly cover all of these things that are so important, but it really is very similar to being an athlete and warming up and warming down and taking care of your muscles and making sure you're stretching correctly and that you're doing endurance and stamina, and you can't just be playing all the time, you know. And so that's what happened to me. I was playing about 8 hours a day, and that's what happened to me. And you think that it doesn't happen to you, and it's never going to happen to you, and then it happens. So a word of caution: no one's exempt from getting injured, but being smart about this is truly the way to go about it.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So after the injury, the horn was in the past, and you spent some time in the corporate world.
I did.
What were you doing in the corporate? This is a total 180 for someone who got a music degree and was pursuing a master's in music performance. What was that like? What type of roles did you have?
Absolutely. So as you can imagine, I was very bitter. You know, I could have played horn all my life and maybe never made it, and would have been happy about it because there was always that what if. But the fact that I felt like it was taken away from me because I wanted to continue playing and I couldn't, it got me to be very bitter. And I ex-nayed all classical music from my life and didn't want to hear about the horn and didn't want to hear about anything because it really was a sore, a really big sore, actually. It was really frustrating. And so I said, I need to go make money and I need to start a new career. So I started working at a bank. I worked at Citibank for a few years. And started sort of, this is what I want, worked at a law firm that did probate, a private law firm in Palm Beach. So did that for about a year and started realizing that I was kind of like dying inside. I was trying to pursue other things and still very bitter about listening to music. And so I ended up landing a job with the Jewish Community Center in Palm Beach. And I got a job in the arts and culture department. That was my first taste of the non-for-profit world. So going into that world, I realized that, you know, I learned a lot about Jewish culture, and I learned that we were supplying, you know, life in a way. We're supplying arts and cultures to the Jewish community, and realizing how big of an impact this made to the Jewish community. I'm like, okay, well, arts and culture. Okay. I see it. I was really enjoying what I was doing. And then my boss at the time said, you know, I know you really like music still, and I could totally see you running an orchestra one day. And that comment literally ignited something in me. And I was like, duh, of course. Yes, absolutely. What was I ever thinking about leaving music? You know, music is still very well in me. And you know, that was really a pivotal moment in my life where I was like, okay, this is it. So immediately I went, this was about, you know, almost 3 years in, and immediately I went online and started applying for as many orchestral jobs that I could find that kind of fit my personality. And I was close for a couple of them and nothing happened. And that was frustrating. And then eventually I landed the job as the education manager with Sarasota Orchestra. And that was actually my first orchestral job. And it was such a fresh, like a breath of fresh air, walking in there, listening to the musicians rehearse. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what I was talking about. And so, of course, education, because through education, I was able to travel all over the US. I mean, I attended Tanglewood Institute. I did Eastern Music Festival. I did the American Wind Symphony. I did CCM Spoleto in Italy. And there's all these things that I got to do through the horn and through education. I was able to go to college for free because of the horn. And so I think education and just having that influence my life in such a big way, I think it's so important for our youth. And so education was definitely the way to go. And living vicariously through these young people playing their instruments and trying out for Allstate and their first concert and their first solos and things like that. That was really fascinating. And so being in Sarasota in that realm really was sort of the beginning of it all. And just understanding that, yes, this is my passion. now I don't play, but I actually now get to live vicariously through the musicians, but I get to play a separate role that's equally as major, if not more important in some cases, to be able to drive and continue to grow this culture of orchestral playing.
So it sounds like Youth Symphony was at least some component of your time in Sarasota if you were watching kids try out for Allstate.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So while in Sarasota, I was heavily involved in the day-to-day tasks and running the youth orchestra program there. They have a wonderful youth orchestra program there with 8 different ensembles. And they have a wind ensemble, they have 2 full orchestras, and then they have, I think, 5 string orchestras. Amazing directors, amazing faculty there. It was just wonderful being there and being able to be part of something larger. So, as you all know, well, maybe not as a conductor, but as administration, as you know, it's all behind the scenes. And so the spotlight's never on you. But when you see these concerts, the YPC or the youth orchestra concerts come to fruition, it really just gives you a good feeling. You're like, this is what I'm meant to be doing. I'm meant to be, orchestrating a lot of these things, no pun intended, orchestrating this from the back end and really making a difference in these young kids' lives and just in people in general that are impacted by the symphony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when I first started here in Canton, I was our manager of education and community engagement. And so the person on staff I work the most with is actually, I was Matthew. It was Matthew and I, because as associate conductor, he does all of our educational content and he's the music director for our youth symphony program. So Matthew and I were, one of the first things I did was auditions for youth symphony and writing the script for YPC and picking the books for, and all of this fun stuff. And it is so, it's funny because when I was thinking about when I decided I wanted to work for an orchestra, because I was getting a degree in performance as well as arts administration. And I thought maybe I would work in the theater world because I'd worked for a lot of different institutions and I decided orchestra, but I did not just apply for education, community engagement stuff. I was applying for artistic operations. I was applying for a lot of different areas within the orchestra. And this is the one I ended up getting. And now it's really hard to imagine not having done it. I feel like people who are working in education and orchestra know everything else that's going on because the grants, the grant schedule, the market, everything. So, looking back now and then you were in Sarasota and then you went to Knoxville. I'm curious, what in your experience now kind of overseeing someone who is doing, as the executive director now, why is the education and community engagement personnel and that part of an orchestra just so integral to what happens here and how an organization can function? Absolutely.
I mean, the youth programs and the education programs are equally as important. And some people beg to differ. And, it's one of those, I'm into memes a lot. So it's like one of those memes where like, you want this, right? And it's a picture of an orchestra. Then you need to have this, and it's a picture of a youth orchestra. Yeah. And it's very true. The future of the orchestral world is dependent upon these music educators and music administrators to continue to cultivate this art form that in some cases is dying, in other cases is thriving, just depending on where you live in the nation or the world. But it is something that's so important, and that, as we all know as music educators or backgrounds with music education, how it really helps you develop as a whole person, not just as a musician. And so it is very important because that is sort of the department that really gives that new sense of, okay, there's the orchestra of tomorrow, and we need to focus, we need to invest, and we need to give them space. And so I have a lot of colleagues, and in some places, they feel like they're undermined, and in other places they feel like they're given their spot. And I know it can be a topic of contention at this point, but really the education youth orchestra, not only because you're cultivating the musicians of tomorrow, but also like I did in Knoxville Symphony, like you did in Ken, I was also director of education and community partnerships. So that added a whole nother realm of now we're going out into the community and we want people to come to our symphony concerts, but they don't know who we are. Yeah. How do they get to know who we are? Community partnerships and going out there and showing who we are and showing that, of course, we play these amazing concerts, but we also enrich lives and we impact lives and we heal lives and we heal souls. I mean, it sounds corny sometimes, but it's so true. Music is so powerful. And to go out there and to present programs for pre-K, for kindergarten, or for elementary, middle, high school, for the elderly, for the sick, then people get to have a sense of, oh, not only do I know what music is, but I know what the symphony really does. And it just really begins to branch out and to get people to come to the symphony, which is the ultimate goal at the end of the day. But all of the symphonies are mission driven, and education is a huge part of, or should be a huge part of, every symphony's mission.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I use this particular phrase a lot, that the educational programming, be it youth symphony or YPC, anything like that, I don't want the people who come to our programming, who participate, to become musicians themselves. I would rather them all become educated consumers of classical music. I'd rather them be the subscribers of 20 years from now. Because as much as we need musicians on stage, we need butts in the seats. So to me,
absolutely.
If a youth symphony kid in 15 years is like, oh my gosh, they're playing the Firebird at my local orchestra. I played that in youth symphony. I'm going to bring my spouse. I'm going to bring our kids. I might even invite my friends. Like that to me is a huge victory.
Mm-hmm. And it creates culture in a community. And I think that's something that I'm trying to instill here in Canton. We're all trying to do here in Canton, Ohio. I'd love to learn more about Billings, and we'll get to that later. But every city has a personality. Every city has its quirks and the things that are unique about it. And Canton, Ohio is the home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Right. So we are
literally,
I'm looking at it.
You can look at Hall of Fame Stadium from where we're sitting right now.
I could walk to it in 30 seconds. We're in the middle of it. And not football is a great thing in American culture. It brings people together. A lot of people love it. Football is a part of American culture. And I think here in Canton, we're trying to elevate the symphony, not because it's not great, it already is great, but elevate it in the minds of our community, that we are just as integral to the community as the Pro Football Hall of Fame, as anything else, that Cantonians can take pride in the fact that they have an orchestra, even if they don't love classical music. They're like, but we've got this cool orchestra, So I think that it's a lot of different things coming together.
Absolutely. And how you mentioned earlier, I mean, that's the other side of the coin, which is, yes, musicians of tomorrow, but as we know, music makes you whole. And depending on who you are as a music educator, when you talk behind closed doors, you're like, yeah, we don't want you to play this instrument for life because it's just like, it's so competitive. Yeah. But we want you to be appreciative because, you want to go to law school? That's your option B? Why don't you make that your option A? Why don't you go to law school? And you're right. Those are the funders of tomorrow. Those are the board members of tomorrow. Those are the sponsors of tomorrow as well. And so making those connections is very important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's really hard to hear how people don't understand the value of education sometimes. And I'm like, why am I having to explain this? I don't understand. But I think that for so long, like the math equation of how an orchestra worked just happened. There was a math equation of how if you got to a certain age and you had a certain amount of wealth, you attended the symphony. And you gave to the symphony in your will, and the kids that were trained in orchestra were the kids who were trained in orchestra because they came from wealthy families and they had music in their background. And there was a formula that just happened. And that doesn't happen anymore. That's not how orchestras, at least in America, operate anymore. And we've got to break out of that formula and be like, nope, it's new. And we got to think about things differently.
And especially in smaller cities like Canton, or I don't know much about Billings at all, but Billings being a smaller market as well, I'm sure it's similar. I mean, I think in the large cities, you still have enough institutional wealth to keep the orchestras going. But in the smaller cities, it's not the same as it used to be.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of competition. So
for
people's time and attention.
And money. There's like
Absolutely.
4 people all giving to everything. It's crazy.
Yep.
But so now you are executive director.
I am.
Really quickly, I'm just curious. What was the timeline? How many years did you spend in Sarasota and how many in Knoxville?
Sure. My light's going off here. There you go. I have censored lights, and if I don't move enough, they go off.
My office is the same way.
Same in here. I'll just suddenly it's dark, and I'm like, what?
So I was in Sarasota Orchestra for almost 3 years. Maybe it was closer. It was between 2.5 and 3 years that I was in Sarasota. Got to learn a lot there. And from there, I got the position of Director of Education and Community Partnerships with the Knoxville Symphony. And I was there for a year. And that has a lot of backstory. I will say this. I was very happy in Knoxville, and a year was a disservice. I felt like I needed to be there longer, but there were some personal reasons why I left Knoxville, and it was very clear to them. I mean, I loved it there. They have probably one of the most robust educational programs that I've seen. I mean, they have a young people's concert, a very young people's concert. This is a plug for KSO for anybody out there. Young people's concert, very young people's concerts. They have a youth orchestra. There's now a youth choir. There's musical story time. There is classroom quartets, classroom quintets. There are master classes. There are side-by-sides. I mean, the list goes on, and it works there. There's a huge market out there for that. And for the size of Knoxville, which is much larger than Billings, they get tons of support. And so they're doing very well. And I feel really proud to have been part of that program just because of the size of the program. And it's a truly wonderful place, great staff, and a great orchestra.
Matthew, I'm really glad you asked that question because I actually didn't know your timeline for things. That's insane. We have almost the exact same timeline when it comes to everything.
We're living mirrored lives here.
Wait, so did you start in Sarasota in 2019?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So I started in June 2019.
And when did you start in Billings?
January 3rd.
No way. Are you serious?
Yeah.
January 3rd.
So now you're executive director of Billings. It's crazy. Our lives are parallel. It's so cool.
Wow. You jumped in mid-season too.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
If you're going to do it, you got to do it big.
Just jump in. So
just jump in.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that move of moving to executive director? And, it's only been 3 months, but a lot happens in 3 months and you learn a lot in 3 months. So can you talk a little bit about this change that you've made?
Absolutely. I will say on a personal note, I was way more nervous to move to Knoxville and be the director than I was to be the executive director.
Huh.
And I thought that was really interesting because going from a manager to a director for me was just a huge feat in my life. And I was really proud of that accomplishment and to be chosen for that role. And it's kind of like a little organization within an organization because of all of the moving parts. And you, like you said, you're in education. Also, the sponsors, the conductors, the timelines of marketing, where the website needs to be. I mean, you literally are in everybody's hands and in everybody's docket. And so what I learned in Knoxville by being given that position is priceless. I mean, I grew exponentially, personally, but professionally. And Rachel Ford, who's the current executive director there, learned much from her. And she runs a great ship. She runs a tight ship. And it was really, really great. It really was a great opportunity. And so going from there to getting this position, I felt like I was a lot more prepared in a way. And there were things that, of course, now I'm working directly with the board, which I didn't do in Knoxville. As an example, there were things like, I'm like, okay, there are a lot of new things, but I felt like I was just more prepared for it. And that's just on a personal note. But being here in Billings, executive director, started on January 3rd, hit the ground running. I mean, no one can ever prepare you for what's to come. Every day is something completely different. Things just pop in your email. People just walk in your office and you're there. You are on all the time. And it's a great privilege. I feel super honored to have been chosen. And I feel honored to have been given the opportunity and just to move to Billings. Moving to Billings was interesting. It was a 3-day hike. I have my wife with me. I have my 2.5-year-old dog with me. And I have my 7-month-old with me, moving all the way from Knoxville, Tennessee to Billings, Montana. So that was very interesting. Got stuck in a snowstorm, got stuck in Jamestown, North Dakota for 2 days. It was just all the things, driving in negative 45-degree weather. But anyways, made it here alive and well, and really adjusting to the weather here. But just some facts that people may not know. Billings is actually the largest, or is the area with the largest concentration of people within almost a 4-state radius.
No
and
way.
If that means anything to anybody, Billings also has the population of about 117,000. So we're not that big, but we are huge compared to a lot of our surrounding areas.
Yeah.
So we are the biggest city in Montana, and we have a huge medical hub here, Billings Clinic. But Billings is thriving with arts. You know, there's the Alberta Bear Theater. You have us. You have the Art House, and on top of that, you have you have the Yellowstone Art Museum, which is called the YAM here. And you have there's a theater house, and there's a lot of historic places as well. But then there's also a lot of other non-for-profits. And so for a community this small, we have tons to offer. And so that's where it gets a little bit tight with the competition. You know, everybody does fundraisers, everybody does galas, everybody does this. And so that's where it gets a little bit a little tight. But at the same time, we are fortunate to have people that want the arts and cultures, that want the theaters, that want, you know, the local theaters and the local films and the independent films. And so it really is a great place to be with culture.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting that you say you were less nervous to go from Knoxville to Billings. And, you know, my jump, because I went from being a manager to president and CEO. And so I was like, I am scared. And because it was the first time I had to be the director of other humans. I mean, I had interns and I'd overseen people, but going from being a manager to a director role is very nerve-wracking. And there's nothing to prepare you for it other than get ready. I feel like a lot of my day is just a bunch of people asking me questions, and it's just me answering questions. And you know, the first week I thought, everyone's going to ask me questions. How will I know the answers? And now, you know, now that it's been 6 months for me, I feel much more comfortable with it. But I do agree that it's so scary to do that first jump off of going from being manager to being director. It is a very interesting, and for someone who was relatively new in their career when it came to orchestras.
Absolutely.
Yeah, says you had been doing this for almost 4 years. Our timelines are so insanely similar. It's crazy. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. So along with being executive director, and for those listening, Mario and I have had conversations about this before, and one thing that we talked about was the dynamic between administration and musician, which is a really it's a really interesting and nuanced topic that has become a very hot button issue for a lot of orchestras in America, for unioned orchestras in particular. And it can cause, and has caused in the past, a lot of animosity between musicians and administration. And I think we really strive here in Canton to have a really good relationship. And I think as someone who is a musician myself, I understand why a union is important, and I understand that if we're going to be a good orchestra that people want to come see, we have to have the best musicians. And to have the best musicians, we need to treat those musicians with the utmost care and respect. And it's super important that we do that. And so I wanted to kind of throw the floor to you and to maybe give your perspective on this relationship that we see in orchestras. And I know that in Billings, you're not a union, but you do have discussions with the musicians, kind of in a union-esque type of way. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this topic and why it's such a hot button issue.
Sure. I think we have to start with the fact that, starting with the fact that, yes, just like in any industry, there are organizations that are not run as well. And there are organizations that are doing well and organizations that are not doing well. And that's a fact.
Yeah.
Is there bad management out there by default? Of course. But are there organizations with great management? Of course. Are there organizations with musicians that have amazing attitudes and are not jaded? Absolutely. Are there organizations that have jaded musicians? Absolutely. So it's a balance beam, in my opinion. And it takes two. And so it is really hard when you have an amazing group of musicians that are wanting to do it, that are there, and you have bad administration. It's really unfortunate. Yeah. And vice versa. It's really unfortunate when you have an amazing staff and amazing administration, and the musicians feel like everything the administration does is against them, and they don't care about the musicians, and they want to pay them as least as possible, and they want to exploit their talent and have them play, hours and hours at a time, which, as we know, it's not possible because there's a union. So that's why there's a union. They are protected. And even some orchestras that have unionized musicians, they're still like, we have to do this and we have to do that. And it's like, well, it's all within the rubric that you agreed upon. So that's where the balance is. And so ideally, you'd have a great orchestra with great mindset and a great administration that really work together. And that's not happening. The union started because musicians were being fired because they cracked a note, because they were late, because of this and that. And so that started to protect the musician. Yeah. Unfortunately, that has evolved to now just being a salary negotiation, and we want to get paid more. And, it's sad. Now, this is not all orchestras. And I can say from the press, that somewhere like Cincinnati Symphony seems to have a really good relationship with their administration. And they really have a good, it's a great example to see that they have a good relationship, that the musicians trust the administration. And you don't get there overnight. You have to see trust to be able to get trust and earn trust. You can't just trust somebody. Now, as somebody who's new to this organization, that's the role I'm playing. They have to see what I do the next few months for them to say, oh, you want the best for us or you don't want the best for us. Yeah. Now, being in Billings, our orchestra is not unionized. We do have union stage hands, but not on the orchestra. And we have an orchestra committee. The orchestra committee, currently there's 5 members. 2 of the members are actually part of our board, and they are voting members of our board. This is really cool. Which I think is great. That's really cool. But the orchestra committee really runs as its own unit. They have their orchestra meetings. They have their orchestra committee meetings. They vote. So it really runs. There are steps, and it's. I hate to use the word bureaucratic, but it is very organized. And so when it comes down to negotiations, it really is the orchestra chair and myself in one room. And we have done, it's right here on my left, the orchestra agreement for the next 2 years is completed. We're signing today.
Wow.
And I think that when you have a committee or a union that is in line with the administration and you both understand what's best, because I want what's best for the orchestra. Without an orchestra, administration does nothing. To that extent, without administration, the orchestra cannot thrive. And so we're all important. This is where we're at, and we have to learn how to work together and how to earn trust from each other, because there have been orchestras that have been jaded because of the distrust, because they see administration say one thing and do one thing. Mm-hmm. I don't blame them. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you know, there are places where they are trying to build up, and when you don't give the administration the chance, and vice versa, when you don't give the musicians the chance to change, it really causes a lot of friction, and no one needs that. We need to be a unit, and we need to understand that everybody wants what's best for everybody. And sometimes that means you get a larger raise, and sometimes it means you don't get a larger raise. But it's not because of that. It's because, and this is just me speaking from my heart. I'm not speaking for anybody or any orchestra, but that's kind of what I've seen and what I've shared with a lot of colleagues. And it becomes a hot button to talk about. It's a little bit contentious, but it is a fact. And these things have to be talked about so that the air is clear and we know where people are coming from. And at the end of the day, we want great musicians, we want great staff, and we want to be able to create greatness for our communities. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm amazed that only 3 months in, you've already had to do a negotiation with your musicians. Rachel is about to start experiencing that.
The amount of similarities. We're, union negotiations with the Canton Symphony.
You've luckily been on the job for a bit before you had to really dive in.
I've gotten a little bit more experience.
But Mario has right away.
Here we go.
I showed up and they're like, oh, by the way, we're negotiating, and you have to create a budget for next season. And I mean, it's just all hitting the ground running, honestly.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Wow.
But I think it's the mindset I'm coming in with, and it's already the culture that the orchestra has been able to build. Mm-hmm. And, there's no perfect orchestra. There is no perfect administration. Yeah. We know that too. Yeah. But it really is, hey, let's be realistic about this. Let's be realistic about races. Let's be realistic about changing terminology. Let's be realistic about uniforms. Let's be realistic about services per week, and do we repeat? Do compensation for travel? Montana's very unique because it's a huge state, but a lot of the musicians play in multiple orchestras in Montana, and so we have to have a great reimbursement package, and we have to have a compensation package that's going to be attractive to create the Billings Symphony. And so we've been able to do that, and we're continuing to do that. But what works here doesn't work in Canton, and vice versa. And I think you really have to just learn this culture and what happens here and how it works. We are not a full-time orchestra. A third of our musicians are local, a third are statewide that drive in, and a third are flown in.
Wow.
And so, yes. So
wow.
I know. So our tuba player, for instance, he currently resides in Chicago.
Our tuba player's in Alabama.
See,
it does not surprise me. There's only one tuba player in every orchestra. So if you win a job, you've won the lottery. Wherever the job is, you're going to go take.
Shout out to Tom Lukowitz.
And it's a fact. And so we treat all of our players the same. We have tenured musicians that don't live in Montana, but the way that we have a structure is, you still, you've been here for this long, and you get tenure, and it, just like any other orchestra, but it is a little bit different. But what we've been able to accomplish in Billings with this system is pretty remarkable if you think about it. And, because it's a part-time orchestra, people can't move here to play with the orchestra because it's a per-service part-time orchestra. Yeah. And so unless they have other gigs, or whatnot, you can't just move here to play with the Billings Symphony. Right. And so that's a huge challenge that we have. But at the same time, we're pretty surprised and are always super grateful of the talent that we've been able to bring to Billings and to the state of Montana through our process.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I was a little bit curious. What is it like so far working with your music director, who I believe is a female conductor?
Yes.
How has that been so far for you?
Anne Harrigan is the music director of the Billings Symphony, and she has been here 18 years, I think.
Oh my
16
gosh.
years. She's been here for a while, 15 years. So I apologize.
That sounds like Reno a bit. Reno's had had their music director for a long time too. Yeah. And
it's been wonderful to get to know her. What she's done in her tenure here has been pretty remarkable, and it's to say with any music director that comes in and really grows the orchestra. I mean, the orchestra what the orchestra has done, at least in the past 5 years, has been pretty incredible. You know, we in 2019 and before, we used to only have 7 subscription concerts, 6 subscription concerts. And then on top of that, we had like Nutcracker Family Concert and like our Symphony in the Park concert and things like that. But now we have 8 subscription concerts. We have a Sukin series, which is like a chamber music series. We have about 7 of those. We have a free family concert, which we have 5 additional concerts to that. We have 3 special events, and, you know, and we have Symphony in the Park. And so the growth has been amazing. The fact that Billings has the Billings Symphony is pretty remarkable. Yeah. A place this size to have this caliber of orchestra doing this many concerts, that's a huge feat. I mean, that's a huge accomplishment for this organization. And so coming into that, I felt pretty lucky to be a part of this. It is we are a tier 6 orchestra. But we do a lot of concerts, and we do last season, we did over 120 educational and outreach performances free. Yeah. And so it's pretty amazing what we're able to accomplish. And yes, it's just like craziness, but this is, we're continuing to, hopefully in the next few years, continuing to grow, continuing to add concerts. And we are doing all of this by the generosity of our community.
It feels like Billings is our sister symphony or something. I feel, because the fact that Canton has the Canton Symphony is crazy. Yeah. This is a freaking good orchestra. These musicians are insanely talented. The caliber of music that comes out of this orchestra is wild. It's so good. And the amount of stuff we do, like I don't know.
We have an advantage though, because Cleveland's an hour away. I actually live in Cleveland, and Pittsburgh is 2 hours away, and Columbus is 2 hours away.
Do you get along with their musicians?
So, well, I mean, our most of the orchestra drives in from Cleveland or Pittsburgh. That's the majority of the orchestra. And then we get a few outliers that come a little farther afield, like our bass trombone lives in Cincinnati.
Our tuba players in Alabama.
Exactly. But yeah, we have the added, unlike Billings, where it's the biggest population center in a 4-state radius. It is bigger than Canton, but not too much bigger than Canton. Sure. Whereas here, we have these 2 major cities with good music schools in them that feed our orchestras. Their graduates feed our orchestras, essentially.
Yeah, and then we're the smallest population center in our region when it comes to city size, right? So it's Cleveland, Akron, us, and all 3 of them have orchestras. So it's really interesting how much parallel there is with Billings, but how different those 2. It's so interesting because looking on your website, just so much cool stuff happening in Billings. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, just so much cool stuff.
It's also a testament to Canton, because it really is a testament to how saturated some of these areas are. Yeah. And there is room for orchestras. There are plenty of musicians that would like to play jobs and would like to play. So the fact that you're in that little trifecta area really makes it more attainable for Canton, and, we don't have a huge, we have MSUB, which is Montana State University Billings, but this is not the flagship campus, And so you have Bozeman that has a flagship campus. You have there's Montana State University, and then there's a University of Montana. And so we don't have those flagship campuses here. And so I come from Knoxville, where you have UT. Speaking of football, they bleed orange, by the way. So the balls, but not only that, it's they have UT and they have this feeder, and so being in a place like Canton, where you have these prolific orchestras, obviously, that have, and prolific schools, and around those orchestras, that you're able to, hey, you're not that far, it's a huge advantage for Canton. And so that's wonderful that you guys are able to have that type of caliber of orchestra where you are at.
So At the executive director level, we were just on a peer call with Group 5 and 6 orchestras and thinking about strategic plans looking to the future of the League of American Orchestras and what our orchestra is going to be. What do you think executive directors need to be kind of having at the front of their minds as we're kind of leading orchestras into the next 5, 10, 15 years?
So that is a loaded question.
I know.
Because it's like, what don't we do? What isn't in our forefront? What aren't we aware of? What aren't we doing?
Yeah.
And so I think on a personal note, in this position as executive director, one thing that I didn't get, as a director or as a manager, is that you are now spearheading a whole organization, not just a department. And so with that, with great power comes great responsibilities, right? And so with that, I know that my goal is, on one hand, is being financially stable, finances, money, budget. And that is a huge part of our job. But on the other hand is, with the passion and knowledge that I have, incorporating that into continuing the growth of the organization. Yeah. So what does that mean? That just means more educational exposure, of course, educational for me. And so, what can we do to continue to go to these schools and impact these kids? They just need one experience. Kids need one experience, one great experience where someone comes in and plays something amazing and they're like, that's amazing. I want to be a part of that. What do I do? Yep. That's all they need is one experience. And so I think continuing our community outreach, continuing our education, but also getting the privilege to work with our music director and putting our heads together and say, okay, well, we want to continue to grow our audience. We want to continue to be eclectic. Well, what can we bring in? And having a voice of power, not ultimate power, but a voice of power that I can steer the ship and say, we need more of these performances. Yes, we need to continue to do Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Mahler. I mean, that's what we do, of course. But there's a new generation emerging, and we need to have these more eclectic concerts, these more pops concerts, these more cover bands. Everything has its place. But that's one thing that I love about being a leader of an orchestra, is that I can now influence that change and saying, we are an orchestra for everyone. Our mission statement is enriching lives through music. That's our mission statement. And so what lives? All lives, old, young, marginalized, rural, everything. And we have and Billings is a very different beast in itself, because our communities that we are outreaching are actually Indian, our reservations, our Native American reservations. And so it's just a different part of the world here. Yeah. And so how do we go out to those reservations and we already have programs in place to go to the Crow reservation and to go to the Cheyenne reservation and, introducing these string instruments and wind instruments and getting them excited about potentially joining the youth orchestra or just having music in your life. It's just having that. And so that's one of the things I love about my job, is talking to people, talking to our donors, letting them know why they're giving and why they should continue to give and what their impact, what they've done. And that's probably my favorite part, is community engagement, education, and talking to our donors and saying, this is what you've done, and this is the difference you've made, and this is where we want to go. And would you continue? Please continue. Please continue. And tell your friends, bring your friends over.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm. So the impetus for this podcast, when we started it in 2020, we were inspired to start having these conversations by the death of George Floyd, and looking at classical music, our own organization and the industry at large, and realizing that it was not a particularly diverse space, and that how we started to have conversations with people about what we all can do as an industry to move the ball forward on this and become a space that is more welcoming to every member of our community. And I was wondering, are there conversations being had on this type of line in Billings, and have you brought something to the table that maybe they weren't thinking about before you got there?
Sure. So they were very excited. Me coming from, me having been part of the Sarasota Orchestra and the Knoxville Symphony, which Sarasota was a tier 2, Knoxville was a tier 3. So coming from a larger organization, what are they doing and what's going on there? And or other colleagues in other orchestras, well, what are they doing? And so we do have a DEI committee here at the Billings Symphony. And I am really, our committee chair is spearheading this, but I'm equally involved with the committee chair because it is something that I believe in. I believe in that we are an orchestra for everyone. We are an orchestra. We are a place that anybody who's anybody can come and enjoy and be transformed or have an amazing experience, have a humanistic experience, have an exceptional experience, have a once in a lifetime experience. I mean, that's what we believe. We believe that music is power and music is for everyone. Music is a human right and everybody should have access to it. And so some of the things that we're doing at the Billings Symphony is, we have our lights, there we go. We have student ticket pricing and we have under 30 ticket pricing.
Oh, okay.
Which is heavily discounted. And so if you're under 30, you can get a full season subscription for like half the price as if you were over 30.
Wow.
And so for our youth orchestra, as an example, if you're part of our youth orchestra, you get to come to all of our dress rehearsals for free, because that's a whole different experience. And so we do have different programs that, it makes it equitable and makes it diverse and makes it inclusive. And so when people think about DEI, the original thought is marginalized communities, underserved population. And that is part of DEI, but that's just like, you're just like hitting the tip of the iceberg. DEI is much more than just race and social, economics and it is that, but it's also, what are your ticket prices? Can everybody come? That's part of it. It is, who are you inviting to be on your stage? It is, who are you inviting to teach your kids? It is, what regions are you going out there to influence? I mean, it is just, the great thing about DEI is that there's nothing that's not DEI, in my opinion. But everything is part of DEI. And so one thing that we are doing in our committee is we've looked at the past 5 years of our concerts and, what genre of music was played at those concerts? How can we diversify that? What composers have we played? And you realize, there's maybe 3 female composers in the past 5 years. That needs to be changed.
Yeah. It's better than what we were doing for a while. That's 3 and 5 years would have been great for us at one point.
Right? Or it's like, who are your guest artists? And I have them down by nationality. And it's like, you can see that there's an overwhelming amount of Americans, as an example, or people that are, born in the US. And then you have your sprinkles of, look, there was a Venezuelan person and a Cuban person and a Puerto Rican person. So what this led us to do is to say, hey, we're not doing badly, but there are places where we can improve.
Yeah.
And that's the first step. I say DEI is not a destination. It is a journey. Yeah. And it never stops because no matter how diverse you are, you can always do more.
Yeah.
And it's plain and simple. No matter how excellent your organization is, you can always be better.
Yeah.
And so DEI is definitely a journey. And that's how we're taking it into consideration. And we have a committee that's like an oversight committee that is really saying, let's get all these data, where are you going? What schools are you going to? How many of those are Title I? How many of those are rural? And do we need to continue to expand? Are you only going to rural schools? Well, no, you also need to go to Title I's. Are you only going to Title I's? No, you also need to go to the nicer schools or the better. You need to go to all schools.
Yeah.
It's everything. And so that really has given us sort of a drive to say, we have all this information. We are seeing some spots here. And then the staff takes that to the artistic committee, to the staff meetings, to the board and say, hey, we have a committee. This is what they found. Now that we're planning for the 24-25 season, let's fill some of these gaps. And that's where you start. I mean, if you go from no diversity to having one female composer, you're doing a great job. I don't think that, people are caught up into doing these huge things. And if you can, go ahead. But some of us don't have the budget. You don't have to do a Black composer because it's MLK. Is it bad? Absolutely not. Is it better than nothing? Absolutely. If you're going to do it MLK, do it. Fine, great. But why not have a Black composer in a regular series concert? Yep. And so those are the things. Is it bad that you're only doing this, in the month of June because of Juneteenth? No. Yeah. But why do your Chinese composer for Chinese New Year's? Why not do a Chinese composer in January? I don't know. Yeah. These are just some topics. And it's an ongoing process. It is, how can we be more diverse? How can we be more inclusive? How can we be more equitable? And those are just the conversations. Oh, we need to tweak that. Let's do it. Yeah. Then the next time, oh, we need to tweak that. Let's do that. And I think that little by little, people are going to start noticing, and people have noticed. Our Sukin series is super eclectic.
Yeah, that's cool.
We have Baroque music, and we have Celtic and Irish music, and we have jazz. We have a jazz band, and we have a pianist, and we have a string quartet that plays. We're going to have a cello quartet next year, and we have. It's like even eclectic mixes of instruments, And so that's sort of where we're at in Billings, and we're doing it one day at a time.
I like it. I like it so much. Just out of curiosity, what is the demographic of Billings?
It's mostly white. It's mostly white. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but if I had to guess, it's a huge percentage. It's mostly, I would say 60, 70%. Then you have, I would say about 20% Native American.
Okay.
There's definitely, there are 5 major reservations within our area. Yeah. So you do have the Native American population, you do have the white population, or and then you have a small percent of like everything. And so one thing that people don't know about Billings, even though there's not a huge population of the of other races, for lack of better terms, I went to the mayor's language, or the mayor's language dinner. And I went there. It was like my first month here. When I tell you that there were 320 people from over 40 nations, we have people that live in Billings that are Korean, that are Polynesian, that are Croatian, Venezuelan, a bunch of Latin American. And it was really interesting because where are you all the time? We want to see more of everybody. Yeah. And it's a testament to say, hey, there's a lot more things that we can do to reach these populations and the different types of demographic that really make living in Billings just that much greater.
Yeah, I think it's also because every community is different. So being inclusive of your community is going to be different based on where you are and where you're from. And I think that's so interesting of a deep Native American population. We've recently dove in to try to learn more about Native American composers, because we've had several we did like one of our educational concerts was the history of America. And so we found a Native American composer, and now we loved his piece, so that we put it on a Masterworks concert. So it went from being on a YPC to being on a Masterworks. And so every DEI for an orchestra is gonna look different because every community is different. And I think that's really important to point out. Is that, not every population looks the same. Not every community looks the same. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model of how this works. So, yeah.
And the marginalized population in some states are very different than in other states.
West Virginia, it's all about rural. It's a different ball game in West Virginia than it is
Appalachian.
It's that population compared to, we talked with Anwar Nazir in Louisiana and New Orleans. Like, that's different. It's different stuff happening. So yeah, that's so interesting. I'd love to visit Billings. It sounds like a really cool town.
You have a home in Billings.
Yay.
No.
There you go. But no, it's interesting. Even Montana is so huge, and our orchestras, they're all smaller, but Montana has 7 symphonies.
Wow. I knew 7. Bozeman did, because I know the executive director of Bozeman, but I didn't know 7. Wow.
7. There are 7 symphonies in Montana. And for such a large state, like I said, some of us share musicians just because of, the nature of the musician pool that we have available to us and things like that. But yeah, it's pretty crazy that there are 7 symphonies in there. And then there's MASO, which is the Montana Association of Symphony Orchestras. It's kind of like our own little, it's very like League of American Orchestras, but like statewide.
That's fun. California has one as well.
Okay,
yeah,
so
California does.
MASO, yeah. And in MASO, they do yearly events. They try to get all the executive directors together, the music directors together, brainstorm. There's a huge every other year. There's a young artist concerto competition, and they get to be featured with different orchestras in the state. And so there are some initiatives that really try to keep us, informed of what everybody is doing and how we can work together. And I think that's pretty cool.
Wow.
So I guess one of your roles as executive director is something that I know Rachel has to deal with, which is making sure that you and the other orchestras in the state aren't doing all of your Masterworks concerts on the same weekends.
Scheduling.
It's hard. So I will tell you that the way that the region, where we are regionally, we're like very, southeast. And so, having the concert on the same weekend as Bozeman could be rough because Bozeman's only 2 hours away. But like if Glacier Symphony was having the same night, yeah, we're not going to get some of those musicians. I mean, we're like on complete opposite sides of it. It's like 8 hours.
Oh
and so there are some, there are some orchestras that it doesn't have as much friction as when orchestras like Helena, Missoula, Bozeman, Butte, I mean, they're all like closer together. So if they all have the same evening, that can be a bit of a challenge for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have so enjoyed talking to you today and really appreciate your time.
I feel like I have a twin.
Yeah. Well, now we know we live mirrored lives.
We go.
Obviously need to continue to be in touch.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
I love building networks, and I love continuing to have a second, third, fourth opinion, because at the end of the day, we all share the same growing pains.
Yeah.
And so I love it when orchestra, executive directors and CEOs call one another and say, hey, I'm having this issue. Have you had this issue? What did you do?
Yeah.
And you kind of feel like you're on your own a lot of the times, and you are, and you could live in a silo and you can do whatever you want, but it's bigger than that. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than Billings Symphony. It's like, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And so why not reach out to your fellow colleagues? And so it's been super fun getting to know Rachel and continuing to know what, she's doing and what Canton Symphony is doing. Yeah. But also looking forward to in the future going to League of American Orchestra seminars and workshops, because that's where you really get to network and really get to be in a room with people that feel your pain and understand all the ups and downs, because it's not all pain. I mean, I do have fun every now and then, and it should be that way. It's ebb and flows, but it's a great honor, and only so many people get to say, get to have this position. And so I think that the networking component is super important, because sometimes you need a shoulder to lean on. 100%.
Yeah.
Definitely. So before we let you go, we're going to ask you the question we ask of every one of our podcast guests at the end of the episode.
Okay.
How do we orchestrate change?
Oh, the $1 million question. Definitely one day at a time, I think. I mean, I really think that change is something that happens internally, individually. And then once it's internalized and it's thought through, it's vocalized. And once it's vocalized, that's where you begin the resistance. And in some cases, the resistance starts even before you vocalize anything. It's within you. Well, I can't say that. Well, I can't propose this. This is crazy. This is crazy talk. They've never done this before, ever. There's no way they're going to do this. And so there's obviously a battle before it even leaves your mouth. Mm-hmm. But once it leaves your mouth, then you have a whole second wave of resistance. And so my words of encouragement is always, nothing venture, nothing gained. So if you don't expose, if you don't talk, if you don't bring up, then you're at square one and you're doing nothing. But if you're constantly throwing out ideas that are going to help change, especially in the DEI world, why aren't we doing this? Well, why can't we do this? Well, we can't do it because XYZ. You know what? XYZ sounds really valid, and I understand. And there has to be a different way, but let's talk about something else now because we can do something with this. And so it's having a balance of what takes precedent and what takes a back seat. And there are many things that all of us could be doing now to continue change. And I think to that, I always say, don't be discouraged and don't compare yourself to anyone or any other organization. It is, if the change that you're making is making an impact, well, then that's where you continue. But you have to start somewhere. We all can't be New York Phil. And I'm not trying to be New York Phil. I'm trying to be the best Billings Symphony I could be. Yeah. New York Phil has tons of things I can learn from, but this is not New York. This is Montana and this is Billings. And so I can get great things and great ideas from our fellow orchestras, but then it has to go through a filter and it has to be like, okay, well, actually, and what's working in Billings, New York could never do.
Yeah.
They could never. But that's what makes this so amazing, is that it is not just one way of doing things. And so I do take from that, but I also say, you have to stay true to where you are at with your people and your community and who lives in your community. Who are you impacting? Who are you bringing together? And making that change. We did 2 years ago, it was called Buffalo Crossing. And we had over 14 tribes represented. And they were native tribes. There were the ring dancers. They were the drummers. There were the Native American dancers. They were on our stage in full Native American regalia, dancing with a symphony orchestra. Like, how cool.
That's
like,
so cool.
Amazing. This was pre my time, but we're planning something like that for the 24-25 season.
I love that.
And so we have that access to something like that, and we continue to do that. And that has impacted our community in such a big way. And we're building bridges to our reservations. And that's tough. That's very tough. Just one day at a time, though, just one day at a time. But I say orchestrate change is one day at a time, and continue. It's about consistency, being consistent.
Mario, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you both so much. We need to do this again. This is awesome. I love this, and I love what you guys are doing, and I wish you both the best and much success, because this is amazing what you guys are doing out there. So continue the hard work, and we'll continue listening to your podcasts.
Mario Lopez, Executive Director of the Billings Symphony.